Today is going to be about LEDs and custom LED setup for the light boxes. And I have John with me here today, Rev Hazlitt. Y'all see him all over the Facebook multicolor group and in the multicolor Discord Shurdle3D group. So he will be diving into a little more knowledge on the LEDs. So this is hopefully going to be a brief rundown. So if you have any more questions, just feel free to ask in the Discord or on the Facebook multicolor group page. All right, let me pass it over to John so he can. While you're here, please check out my website, which has a ton of multicolor 3D printing models, as well as how-to instructional videos, how to make them. I also take commissions. If you do not want to create your own model, don't have the time to do it, you could contact me and I will make them for you. Please support my work by subscribing, and I have a ton of models on the website for you to check out for free. Just scroll through them, find what you want, download the zip file, and hit print. Thanks. John, what you got going on with the custom LEDs for us today?
All right. Well, what I wanted to talk about was these little things. D1 minis. They are incredibly inexpensive. Very specifically, this is the Wemos D1 Mini V3. There's a lot of ESPs, a lot of D1s. There's a whole lot of different variations to them. I specifically like this one because it has mounting holes. And it's $1.60-ish. Depends on where you get it and how long you're willing to wait for the shipping. They're actually really, really easy to set up too. It's a little bit intimidating at first because you have to deal with some soldering and some other stuff, but it's really not that bad. Just as a very quick walkthrough on that, if I go up to here, I love their webpage. No WLED GE knowledge. I love that. From here, they have a link somewhere buried in here. I just type it in, install WLED.me. All you need for this, what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to grab my old BlackBerry phone cable. Just plug the thing in straight to your computer. It's easier to do when I'm looking at it. That's it. That's all you need to do. It should light up. And back over on the WLED page, you have a choice of which version of software to load. I've played with the beta. It works. It has a couple of quirks that I'm not very happy with, so I stay on the stable release branch. Generally, a good idea, basically whatever you're using. From there, hit install. It's going to come up and show you things it's found. I've got another device plugged in, but in this case, it's the one that says paired. You might have some other devices. Sometimes you have to click and then it doesn't work and you try the other one. But from there, click install. And then click install again. Now, it is important. It will be erased. Anything on this little guy that I'm holding, it's going to get blown away. So this takes about a minute. And while that's running, it may or may not blink a blue light at you. I don't know. Sometimes it does. Kind of depends on the very specific version you have. It'll take a minute or two. It'll go through the installation. Now, they do have some help on here. So in case it doesn't show up, like no device found, what can you do? Sometimes what you have to do on these, there's a little reset button. And I don't know if the camera will focus on it. A little boot or reset button. And it may be in a different place depending on the specific version of this that you get. Sometimes you have to hold that down when you plug the thing in order to do that. Yeah, like in this case, it didn't pick it up. So just unplug it. We'll try it one more time. Not that it's terribly important because I already have another one set up. Plug it back in. And we'll try one more time. Just for good measure, I'm going to refresh the page. Back to our stable release, install, port 1, connect. We'll see what it does. See what we get. Okay. Usually by now it would actually show that it's doing the installation. It may honestly be the hub that I'm plugged into right now. I generally do this off of an old laptop that has all the Python tools and other stuff installed on it for doing the custom firmware. So we'll just pretend that that succeeded. What I have put together, I've got over here, and you can lose audio for just a second, or when I go over there, I've got a little box that I've already put together. So in this box, let me go back up to here just to get a close-up of it. I've got two different LED strips. I've got a SMD style LED strip, a WS2812B. It's a little 5-volt RGB strip. And then on the opposite side of it, I have just a single color white cob LED. Now, the idea behind this, the way I've got this wired together, the D1 Mini takes its TX pin, which is GPIO 1, and that connects to the data pin on your LED, on your WS2812B strip. These work by having an actual controller for each and every little LED that's in here, which is awesome. All you have to do is feed it power, so your 5-volt and your ground, and then it takes a data pin right off of the D1 Mini. Try and keep this green wire as short as possible. If that gets over like 4 inches, you have to start dealing with putting in capacitors and level shifters and things like that. So if you can keep that wire short, which in this case you can see over here is just this little green wire, keep that short, you should be fine. If you start getting flickering, the patterns don't quite work right, double check your soldering. If you have a cold solder where it didn't really have a good time to melt and adhere in, just reflowing that, just holding your soldering iron to it, melting it back down, letting it kind of reattach, sometimes all you need. If you can, keep that wire short. The other one
So
that I did in here, yes.
Quickly, what I am looking at now is those. So the people just getting into this, those, the RGB strip that you have on the picture, those have
Yeah.
three copper, what do you call them? Where you can solder to.
Contacts, pads.
Yeah, the contacts. So
Let
a lot of
me.
the RGBs that you order off Amazon, they come with the 4, and those aren't the programmable LEDs, correct?
That's correct. So what I had shown 2 weeks ago, I was playing with lots of different types of LEDs. There's your traditional RGB LED, where you have the 4 pads, and literally one is going to be either positive or ground. It just depends on the way they're wired up. And then the other 3 are your individual channels, red,
Yeah.
green, and blue.
So if you're looking for customizable LEDs, you need the one with the 3 pads, not the 4.
Yep. Now, sometimes, and this gets silly, sometimes you can actually find programmable ones that have 4 and even 5 pins. It just kind of depends. But your standard WS2812B, which I'll put in chat, and I've actually got some other stuff I'm going to hand out at the end of this. Your standard WS2812B or WS2811, if you're looking at 12 or 24 volt, they will have just 3 pins. It varies from manufacturer, but typically it's just the 3. And kind of the giveaway on that, if I zoom in real close on this one, it's kind of a crummy picture. It says plus 5 volt, G for ground, and then this one says DI for data in. And it's got an arrow pointing in which direction to go, because these strips are directional. You can't just put power anywhere to them and have it work. Your non-control ones, like the cob LEDs up here, I could put power anywhere on this. It's just a wire. It doesn't care. But when it comes to the programmable ones, it has to know where it's starting, because each one of those pixels is actually addressed. And you'll see it later in WLED that it literally says this is pixel 0, this is pixel 1, and so on and so forth. And where you put that signal line in determines where you start. And if I were to say connect it here, it would actually cause some problems, because there would be some interference caused by these pixels behind it. And it's not a good time. You have to start at 0 and work your way through.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's
something that I ran into whenever I very first started trying to attempt that. Because I had some laying around, like 4 pad.
Well, the ones like you get the monster ones from Walmart.
Yeah.
Those are going to be your 4 contact or 4 pin or 4 pad, whatever you want to call it. And one of those is going to be either positive or ground. Again, it depends on how they wire it. And then the other three are literally just your RGB channels. And those work because their controller controls how much, well, how frequently it turns the power on to those individual channels to mix and give you the color you want. But it's the whole strip, and that's it. You can't do individuals on it.
Yep.
So I put this one together to kind of show off the two different types and how they look. It's hard to get pictures of these because these lights are bright and the cameras don't want to work right. But the way this box goes together, I've got one side that has the Cobb LED strip and one side that has the SMD, which is the surface mount device. That's what you call that style of LED. Tried to get some pictures of it real quick just so we can have a higher resolution still somewhere in this video. One of the things I wanted to show off on this, the Cobb LEDs put out much more light. Like per meter of LED strip, they're going to be higher wattage. They're going to put out more light. That light is actually going to be a higher clarity. There's something called a CRI, color refraction index, I think is what it stands for. Basically how accurate that white is. If you think about like the old sodium lamps, the street lights, before they went LED, how everything kind of turned orange, that was a super low CRI. Most Cobb LEDs are a very high CRI. I find that effect much more pleasing to the eye. So if I'm making just a box either with colored PLA and it's just simply going to light up, or if I want one that, even if it's just black and white and I just want it to light up, if I don't care about getting colors and effects, I almost always prefer to put in the Cobb LEDs. If I'm doing something where I want it to light up, to have effects, to do cool stuff, that's where I'll go with those WS2812B LEDs. If you want to call them IC LEDs, that's kind of the delimiter. This little box, one of the other things I wanted to show on it, after running it at full brightness, full white for a couple of minutes, I put glow-in-the-dark PLA as kind of an accent band because it's semi-translucent, it lets light through. And that's kind of the point of this one. You see there's more light coming out to the sides of the box, that it puts more of that bias lighting out than you get out of the SMD just because there's more light. But it also does a better job of charging the particles inside the glow-in-the-dark PLA. This just has to do with the fact that there's more light and it's a whiter light versus the mixed red, green, blue to make a fake white that you get out of the RGB lights. And that's true also for RGB Cobb LEDs. They mix red, green, and blue to make white, and it's not a very pure white. There are LEDs that have both red, green, blue, and a white pixel in them as well. Those are really nifty. They're typically more expensive. They're a little bit more difficult to configure because there's extra channels to deal with and all sorts of other stuff. If you want to have something that does pretty colors and high clarity white, definitely something worth looking at. They usually call those RGBW LEDs because they add the white LED to it as well. And then this is just going to be in the little data packet that I throw out, just the numbering diagram. Because on that D1 Mini, I'm using the TX pin and the D1 pin. But when you get into WLED, the software we're using, you have to know what the GPIO pin number is. So TX is pin 1, D1 is pin 5. So this is just a basic little diagram that I like to reference. But going back to it real quick, if I scroll back some, there's only 4 wires connected to this D1 Mini. I know I've got some extra wires kind of tucked away here where I soldered everything together. Your 5 volt, your ground. This yellow one, it's actually yellow, but you can see how it's yellow up here where the cleaner, whiter light of the Cobb LED lights it up versus where you have that mixed colors down here and it looks orange. It's kind of my example of what low CRI versus high CRI looks like. What I'm doing on this one is using this as a control wire to run this little LED driver. This is a little 50-cent LED driver. It's only good for like, I think, 10 watts or something, but it's fine for a light box. If you're putting more than 2 meters worth of LEDs into a box, you've got a really big box and you need something bigger. But for the little ones, these little guys are cheap and they work great. This one takes 5 volt power in, takes its signal in from the D1 Mini, and it's kind of hard to see right now. There's a white wire here as well. I tried to put a shadow to it. It has a ground that you use that 5 volt in the ground to actually run the thing. and then you have that little signal, or I'm sorry, the positive, the 5 volt that comes out of this. This is what it's actually going to do. This box takes the control signal from the D1 and tells it to create what's called a PWM signal. Basically, it's rapidly turning the cob LED on and off in order to achieve a brightness setting. So this little driver, this is something that you cannot get directly out of a D1 Mini. Fortunately, they're cheap, they're small, and you can kind of bury them away if you're going to work with a non-IC LED strip, which this could also be. You could stack 4 or 3 of these things together and run an RGB strip if you wanted. It'd be a bit silly, but you could do it. I've done a couple of different boxes that use cob LEDs because I want the brightness or the clarity or whatever, and I'll stick these guys in there to drive them and use the D1 so I get all the smart home integration and timers and cool effects and whatnot. Just a little extra chip to throw into them. So anyways, what does this actually look like? Well, I've got my example box over here, and I've got WLED up here and running. Now, right now it's turned off, so if I cut that on, there we go. Let me go turn off those lights real quick. So you can see the difference immediately. And because I have to have my exposure very low on the camera to actually see this without like blowing it apart, that's where you're getting that kind of wiggling from, that pulsing. Because that PWM signal where it's actually telling this to turn on and turn off and turn on and turn off, my camera's catching that because it's at a very low frame rate right now to have that really underexposed image. If I turn that up to full brightness, it'll kind of go away because now it's just running at 100%. So if I cut that back down to like 50% brightness, that duty cycle where it's telling it not to run quite so much, that's where you're getting that kind of waving from. So in this, I tell it just to run everything at full white. And you can see how there's a difference in the quality of the white. It's much more uniform on the cob side because it's literally just a stick of lights versus having one every so often. And you can get this in greater densities. This is a 60, I think, 60 LEDs per meter. You can get these in 30, you can get these in 90. They have several different ones. You can get these to where they're literally packed one right next to the other. And depending on your project, you may need that. You may need them to be more densely packed. You may need them to be more spaced apart just so you're not putting too much heat into the box. Just kind of depends. So
for the
the
people
demo I put on,
looking for more consistency in the lighting, the cob is obviously the go-to choice because you're going to have a solid, like you said, a solid stick of light versus a lot of little lights. So you're not going to have bright spots in your light box.
yes. And I'm just going to pull up real quick. Not a brand endorsement, even though I have used Potix. I think I actually have some of these, and I just haven't worked with them yet. You can get the IC, which is the smart, the integrated circuit, or the controllable LEDs that are cobs. I think I have this exact set, and I just haven't worked with it yet. So this is kind of like the best of both worlds, but there's one problem with that. This is these are 24 volt. Those are not usable in this case. There is a 5 volt version. A 5 volt version, 1 meter is $20. Or 2 meters, I'm sorry. So 6.5 feet, 2 meters, $20. And they're throwing in all their extras, all the controllers and remotes, all the things you're not going to use. So to find just the strip at a reasonable price, these get expensive. But again, it is the best of both worlds. You get the full functionality of the integrated circuit, of the RGB, I mean, all that good stuff. I have yet to really work with these. I have one box that has it in there, and I wasn't really happy with it because when I set it to white, it was kind of that ugly muted white, and I just didn't use them anywhere past there. So yeah. But anyways, back to the example. How does WLED work? How does this function? When you first get it up and running, which in the installation process that I think did not work on the little one I plugged in, it comes up and asks you for your Wi-Fi settings. the SSID and the passkey to get in. You punch that in. Once that's come up, then you can actually find this guy on your network and go to it from there. One of the very first things you need to do is go into config. You
So
shouldn't
to
have to
get
deal with
to
Wi-Fi.
that controller, you type in the IP address for that piece of equipment.
The IP address is the preferred way to go. Otherwise, you can type in, I think, just WLED.local. They tell you on the webpage how to get to it. I run a different style network. I do not have that working because this is actually in a separate isolated subnet, so different scenario.
So you will have to figure out
I-
whatever that IP address is for that
Yeah.
for that piece that you hook up.
Or it tells you when you go through the setup, it tells you, I think it's just WLED.local. You type that in, and then MD&S will carry it forward and find it for you. If you have one of these already set up, you can actually find, there's this button up here, it says nodes, and it will show, like, I've got the nightlight in my daughter's room, and I've got the angry marine on my wall right now. So anything that's in that same subnet, it will find those other ones for you, and you can just click right over to them. So, like, I can jump over to this one and see the other one that I've made and tell it I want it to light up or whatever I want it to do. It's pretty cool to be able to just click that one button and jump between them. So if you have one already set up, maybe you want to have one as like a workbench that you play with, which I have as well, then you can go to that one and use nodes to jump over to it. So maybe an easier way of doing it. Anyways, in the config, Wi-Fi setup is stuff you've already done. You can come through and there's stuff you can change in there. Not going to really dig through that. LED preferences is what matters. There's an automatic brightness limiter that by default is turned on. Play with it first before turning that off. If you notice it's kind of dull, it's not very bright, you may want to cut that off. There's a amperage calculator inside of this to make sure you don't blow things apart. Generally, it's not needed, and it's not like unchecking that's just going to cause an immediate fire or anything, but you can uncheck it and see what it does. I always uncheck it. For the hardware options, this is where you have to start counting and looking at things. Like I was saying before, WS281, in this case, I have two Bs, WS281 11s. There's several different flavors. They're all the same kind of controller. They just have different voltages. That's really what it is. The 12Bs are 5 volts. The 11s are going to be your 12 and 24 volts. There's a few other differences, but that's really what matters. Color order, these are all things that when you plug them in, let me jump back real quick since we have our example up. If I tell this to be red, red please, solid, red. There we go. Okay, so I've got that red, and I'll go ahead and turn off the cob so we just have that. Right now, it knows what to make red because I've told it what order the color should be, green, red, blue. If I change that to red, green, blue, and save it, well, my red is now going to be the wrong color because it's still sending the signal saying turn on this LED at this brightness, but it's no longer the red one. So, yeah. If you turn it on, it should default to being orange. If it comes on and it's blue or green or something else, then the strip you're using might be using a different color order. Most of them are green, red, blue. So by default, when it comes on and it goes to that orange color, you should be fine. You need to know how many actual pixels you have because, again, these are addressable. If I were to tell it I had 40 on this strip, not only is it going to throw off its calculation for how much power I'm consuming, it's not going to be able to properly point to each one of these. If you count across, there's 9 in that strip. So if I wanted to have it do like a rainbow effect going across, or I wanted to have it do something where it goes back and forth, knowing how long that is, it can send the appropriate signal, say, okay, send it out and then bring it back. But if I told it I had 40, you just get like part of the effect and then nothing would be happening while those non-existent LEDs were changing before it eventually came back and then flashed real fast. So just literally count them with your finger. 1, 2, 3, count them out, know how many you have. Remember earlier I had mentioned we had to know what GPIO pins we were using back on this diagram. Well, this is where I've got that green wire plugged into GPIO 1. That's where I tell it I'm using GPIO 1. That's why having that little cheat sheet, knowing what your GPIO numbers are to your actual used pins are, is really useful. There's a wealth of information in the WLED forums and just right on their webpage directly. They have some really, really good getting started guides. They have some recommendations as to which pins you should use for your project. Specifically, if I'm not mistaken, they say TX and D1 are hardware controlled. They have a hardware clock. Matters if you're working on bigger things. But in my case, what I always do, because sometimes I have issues with this, when I go to set one of these up and I'll get it all wired up and then it doesn't boot. I plug it in and nothing happens. I'm like, oh, did I fry it? Did I cook it? I'll disconnect my LEDs from it and it boots up. I can get to the web interface again. It's working. Sometimes, depending on what you're plugging in and what pin you plug it into, it will actually prevent it from booting. So one of the things I always do, I grab my alligator clips, little guys like this, or little pin jumpers, or whatever you might have, wire it up temporarily. Just connect it all temporarily. If you get the flickering, that's okay. You've got a wire that's too long, but just make sure that you can plug it in and it boots up and it works, because I've had a few of them. I mean, the quality control on these $1.60 boards is not the greatest. So if this little board happens to be defective, I'm not going to be heartbroken. It wasn't that expensive. But maybe I have to use a different pin. Maybe instead of using D1, I need to use D2 or D3. So I always mock it up temporary just to make sure it works before I start soldering things together. In this case, because I had connected my LED driver for the Cobb LEDs to the D1 pin, that's GPO 5, so I marked that one. Setting that up, if I had more segments in here, I think you can have, well, basically as many pins as you have. You can come in and choose specifically what type of light you have, how it's set up, what pin it's connected to. Fire in as many of these segments as you want. I would suggest checking this box right here. Make a segment for each output. If you have multiple light segments that you're putting in there, like 2 different LED strips, put them on different pins. Don't try to chain them together unless the end of your chain is way far away from the D1 Mini, and let it be different segments. That makes it a lot easier when you start putting your programs together, which one lights up and when and how, to have them as different segments, different outputs. Beyond that, there's a lot more we could get into, but time constraints, don't want to, about how buttons work and the different types of buttons. I will warn you, if you use button 0, the default action for button 0, if you hold it down, is to erase your Wi-Fi settings. So if you do put a button in and you use it as button 0, be careful with it. It's actually super useful if it's something that you're selling, that you can set it up and you can use it and you can work with it, and then you just hold the button down and wipe your settings out so the next person who's buying it can go in and put their own settings in. But if you're not careful, you could erase your settings. I generally use button 1 for any of the things I do, like the capacitive buttons so I can touch the thing to turn it on and off, things like that. I'll use button 1 for that. There's so much more you can do with this. There's infrared remotes that you can build or purchase. There's sound reactive where you put microphones into it. It's actually a separate version of WLED. If I go back to looking at here, there's actually an audio reactive version that will use that microphone to do like colored pulses based on the frequency and pitch of the music that you're listening to and things like that. It's really, really nifty. The D1 Mini does not have the horsepower to do that. You need a full-on ESP32 in order to run that. An extra $1 for the controller, but it's also a larger controller. So if you're trying to keep things small inside your prints, you probably want to get the D1 Mini anyways. There's a whole lot of other things. One thing to look at on here, what preset to run at boot. By default, it uses 0, which is fine. That's just where it turns on orange. And what brightness to boot up at. That's going to matter because once you start setting your programs and your presets, you're going to want to be able to say, well, what does this thing do when it receives power, when it turns on? There's a lot, and I mean a lot of other options that you can play through. For the most part, the defaults are perfectly fine. There's some other items in like time and macro where you can come through. I would suggest doing this. Tell it by default this box is unchecked. I would check this box. Let it go ahead and grab your time zone or your location. Having an accurate clock comes in super useful if you start programming schedules. And it's just, for the safety of everything on your network, having things with accurate clocks is just better. I would suggest that it just takes 2 or 3 seconds, click 2 boxes. If I tell it get location, it opens up and says, oh, we found where you are, set in WLED, you're done. I would do that. The schedules are super, super cool. I can tell it like at 6 a.m., so 6 and 0 minutes, activate preset 0 or activate preset 5 or whatever. So if you're going to have something left on the wall, maybe you want it to turn on at low brightness in the evening, act kind of as a nightlight, turn off at 9 a.m. while you're at work, and then turn on nice and bright at 6 p.m. when you come home. You can do that with these schedules. It's really cool
Or
stuff.
even such as like a open close sign.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to, if you had, say, a red and a green that you wanted to use to indicate open close status, things like that, you can set up these different presets to do that for you. And that's what's happening over here. Getting back to the main screen, I've created 2 presets. I created one called Demo that just turns the cob LED on to like 50% brightness and then does that little rainbow pattern with the RGB LEDs. I then created another one called White that just turns them up to full brightness and tells the RGBs to be solid and as close to white as I could get it. The presets are super easy. Basically, let's say we wanted to do the cob LED at like very low brightness, and I'm going to come up here and click on my my other one for the controllable ones. To expand that and just kind of show what's in here, because by default, actually, let me do that. Let me show you what it looks like by default. If I just reset all the segments, this is what you get by default. It just says segment 0, and it's going to list every LED that you have, which is fine. Except that's not what I have. So my segment 0 is actually the first 9 LEDs. That's my segment 1 that we had back on our config. If I look at the LED preferences, my first one here, these are my 9 RGB LEDs. So my segment 0, I want to make 9 long, tell it OK. And then I'm going to add a segment. I've got that one new segment, OK. And now, is it going to do it for me? Solid. Come on. Or did I not do that right? 9-1, mirror effect. Nope, why aren't you doing it? 0, 9, 9, 10, offset, grouping, 1 spacing, 1 LED. That should work. Make a liar out of me. What did I do wrong? 9, 10, 1, 0. No, it was all the same. I don't know. I was clicking the wrong button, I guess. But anyways, this is what, in my case, by having that 9 segment RGB LED and that 1 segment cob. Oh, I know what it was. For the cob LED, it defaults to having the light off. That's what it was. I didn't turn that back up. So shame on me. Depending on what type of LED your segment is, you'll notice that you get different options. So segment 1, as it showed in the config, it was the WS281X. It gives us all the cool different color options. So I can come through and say I want to use, I don't know, the fire one, whatever. And you can change the colors in these to make them do, that one's very busy. Let's go to something that's, there we go. And there's a lot of these. And I mean, there's a lot of these. They go on for a while. A lot of these look a lot better when you have more LEDs in the strip than just 9, but they do work. When I go over and click on the cob LED being just what's called a PWM white, I don't have very many options. I have the option for like blinking to make it turn on and off. I can make it do breathing, which is just fading on and off. I mean, you name it.
I'm not sure if you
There's different
covered
options.
this or not, but how do you measure, how do you tell it how long your cob light is, since it's one solid stick?
You don't have to, because it is literally, as far as it's concerned, one LED.
Okay.
That's the difference between the IC, the integrated circuit, and the non-IC. For the IC, it actually sees that, oh, I have pixel 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 8, so 9 pixels total. That's where it's getting 0 through 9. And then when it looks at this, the cob LED, it's literally just seeing that controller. It's just seen that driver that's running it, and it sees one pixel, one LED. That's
Gotcha.
why I can't make like one half of this cob LED light up and the other half not, because the whole strip is just one. Just like the Walmart RGB LEDs, the monster ones where it's, you know, it's all red, it's all green, it's all blue. You can't do individuals. The same thing here. That could be a segment this long, or it could be 5 meters. It doesn't matter. As far as this thing's concerned, it's one LED. So you can play with the different settings, and like in this case where it's fading down and coming back up, you can actually take the background and make it a little bit brighter, so maybe it doesn't fade quite all the way out. You can play with things like that. So you still have some functionality if you're using those non-smart LEDs. But the RGB LEDs, the RGB IC LEDs, the controllable ones, the WS281Xs, those are the ones where you have all of the fun features about telling them to do different colors, and there's a lot of different color choices. So like I can switch that to ocean, and now I'm getting these blues and whatnot. What I'm going to do real quick too, I'm going to go back over to this. I'm going to put the lid on this. And part of why I wanted to do this, I wanted to show off the way that this looks different between the two different styles of LEDs. And first of all, I'm just going to cut off the colored one, and we're just going to look at the way the cob LED looks. Of course, because I have my exposure turned way down so it's not blown out, even when I turn it down, you get a kind of rich color. The whole thing fills in. And to the human eye, this looks so much better than it does to a cheap webcam, to my 9-year-old Logitech. It's
I
an
think anyone
original
taking
C.
pictures of light boxes will understand completely what you're
Yeah.
talking about, because it is
The only
hard to
time
take pictures of light boxes.
In fact, the only time I've ever had a good picture, I had to get my DSLR out. And even then, I sat there playing with a number of different settings until I finally got a half decent picture of it. Here we go. Let me switch over to this. So this was a cell phone picture. And yeah, that is a pink cob LED. So it comes across very pink. And this was very, very, very turned down. You know, the light's at its full brightness, and I've got my phone basically barely even capable of seeing the thing. I was playing around in the pro settings trying to get it. That's what the camera normally sees. If you just like take an auto picture of it, it just blows it apart. And the same thing, I put it up on my daughter's wall, and it just blows it out. And I finally went and got my camera. Nope, not that. There we go. I finally got my camera, and I was able to get pictures that make it look a little bit more like it looks to the eye. More like that. Well, that's the CR2. There you go. So that's more or less what it looks like to the eye. It's still a little bit dark in the middle, a little bit blown out here. But yeah, photographing these things is not a fun experience. And we're seeing that here on the workbench. So right now I've got the brightness turned down pretty low, and that's where we're getting that strobing from, because it's at that low duty cycle. If I crank the brightness all the way up to my eye, it looks much better, but I'm trying to get it visible here. If I, however, turn that one off and turn on the SMD side, well, we get basically the same thing. I tried to color balance this. It looks kind of slightly orangish to my eye, I'm going to say. It's not a very good white. These are, I want to say, the 60 per meter, so they're fairly close together. And if I were to put it, not Android, because that one moves. There's one I was looking for. And give it some color. There we go. With that, you can see where the individual lights come on and turn off. And depending on the pattern you're using, the opacity of the face of your box, which this box was done at 0.6 millimeters thick, and that's a warm white PLA, so it's not a very dense or opaque material. You're going to be able to see those individual pixels as they dance along. Some some patterns you use. Like if I switch this down to, where is it, to the rainbow pattern, you can still see the way those individual lights move along. The only way you're going to fix that is by using a different pattern that doesn't have dead spots in it. Like I was using this April night, and you can see that it has like a blue and then an off and then a green and then an off, and you can very clearly see that here. One that's more contiguous, let's find like this rainbow. That's a much more smoother flowing one, and having that warm PLA act as a diffuser layer, it does a good job of blending it. To my eye, actually looks fairly well blended. And I don't know if maybe I can, give me 1 second here. I'm going to turn my exposure down even further to kind of clean this up some. That's about what the colors look like to my eye. Of course, it's much brighter than that, but this way the camera can actually see it without overexposing. So it's fairly smooth. But if I go back to one that has those spots in it, wow, that one's fast. Let's slow you down even further. You can definitely pick out where the off lights are. You can pick out where the gaps are in it. If we pick a different one, nope, not that one. There's too many of these to choose from. You can definitely see where they're not illuminated. It does a very bad job of having a lot of fill light, and there are ways that you can kind of adjust for that. Like on this particular pattern, the
Yep. So I'm
background
sure
color.
playing with this over time, you'll figure
Yeah.
out your favorites over time and just go straight to them.
So one of the things you can do here, most of these will have an effects color and a background color. If the background color is black, just give it a little bit of brightness, and that'll help fill in to where it doesn't quite have so much of a dark spot when it's not on. But again, lots and lots of these to play with to figure out which ones you would want to use. And the more you work with them, the more you're going to get out of them. Going back to our demo that we were running before, again, I'm super underexposed. That's where that flashing is coming from. You can see how that color is nice and smooth, and it moves easily. If I had a higher density LED, the 90 or 120s, whatever the really dense ones are, that would look laser smooth. If these were the 30s where you have like 1.5 inches in between each one, it would be extremely obvious. That whole box is 6 inches across. It's not a very large box. Let me turn my exposure back up so we can actually see what's going on. There we go. I could spend an entire evening talking about all the different profiles. We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
The important part
So
is, again, just the real quick, the important part is knowing what pin you're on, how many LEDs you have in it, and what type of LEDs you have. The WS281Xs are the most common. If you have the 3-pin, where it's they call them IC RGB LEDs, the integrated circuit, this is most of what's out there. If what you have is an RGB LED, a non-IC, it's not a smart one, there's really no way to directly control that through WLED, not without adding drivers into it, and it gets complicated. So in that case, I wouldn't try and use them. However, for the one color RGBs one color cobs, where all you have to do is add that one little driver, I think this is a great way to add smart functionality for not even $3 to a box using high quality cob LEDs. I think it's a
and what did
really
you
good
say
selling point.
the small controller was called again?
So there's a couple of different ones. This is an LDO6A JSA. You can find them on Ali. They're like 50 cents, 60 cents, something like that. I've used some other ones, AOD 4184s. They're much higher power capacity, kind of overkill for something like this. I've been kind of playing with several different ones. I've got a couple of, let's see here, what do I got? So what are these? Photodiode. Yeah, like I've got these. These are the AODs. They're a little bit bigger. Can't really see the front of that one. Maybe one of these is turned the right way around. There we go.
Yep.
Just a little bit larger of a chip, a little bit higher of power capacity. The LDOs, like what I've got in there right now, they are much smaller. That's two of them hiding in there. Uh, not as high a power capacity, but they work fine for the smaller boxes.
Yep.
And
So
I've
in order
got trays of these things.
to make a custom LED light box, there's not really much required, and there's not really much knowledge required. You can essentially almost plug and play as long as you know how to solder a couple of things together, run a handful of wires, and you can have a really cool outcome.
I think so. And that's if I go back to this one. Like I was saying before, I've got this
Yep.
where the power comes in. I've just got a little snap-in USB plug, and that gives me a red wire and a black wire. My positive and my negative 5-volt and power coming in. That's what's right here on this. From there, I've just literally taken every ground wire and tied it together, soldered it, and then threw some shrink wrap over it. I've taken all of my 5 volts, all my red wires, brought them together, soldered them together, the heat shrink so that you don't get any shorts. And I've literally got 5-volt going into the driver. I've got 5-volt going into the to the WS2812Bs, and I've got 5-volt going into the D1. So those 3 places: here, here, and here. Of course, you have to have your ground for everything, so it's the same thing. I've got a ground here, and a ground here. What this driver does is it changes how often power is applied, in this case on the positive 5-volt. So I still have a ground. I've actually got 4 ground pins connected together instead of just the 3 positives, because the positive I have going into my cob LED is just coming off the driver. That's this white wire right here coming up to the LED strip.
Yep.
Um,
So wrapping it up,
yep.
any other shenanigans you would like to throw out there before we end it?
I've got so much. I'm going to throw into the chat just in case anyone wants it, assuming this is okay with Polymaker. I've got all the files I use for this, the pictures, even the CAD file and the slicer for if someone wants to make this stupid box, which I was very tired when I put it together and did not think it through. The divider wall, it was 38 layer changes. I didn't really think that through when I put it together, but there's just going to be a zip file in the chat right now, and anyone who wants it, there you go. You've got all the pictures and the diagrams and fusion files and everything else. I think it's a fun little example, something to play with, if nothing else, just to take a basic LED that you would put together, a basic box you would put together, and where you could have just a power switch. I'm going to have this thing, it turns on, it turns off. Or it doesn't even have that. It's plugged in or it's unplugged. That's all it is. I did a lot of these where I would put an integrated controller, like I'd break one apart and tape it in there, and that worked. But those things are like $15 a piece. The D1 minis are no more than $2. If you get them on AliExpress, they're cheap. Part of what I do in the boxes on these, you can find it in the design file. I just put in little plastic feet so that I can screw them in. I got a bag of 200 little bitty screws that fit in there for like $1.50. So it's not like it's expensive. I would say I spent maybe a half an hour drawing this box. Far too long printing it because I was not using Polymaker Filament and I kept having some feed errors. But when it finally finished printing, it took about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to put the whole thing together, and 10 minutes to put the basic programming into it. It doesn't take much, and you can take a box from being, it turns on, to, oh, well, you can now take your phone, and where's my phone? You can take your phone and you can control this thing directly from your phone. So like, that's my daughter's nightlight. I can do the brightness and everything right from my phone.
From the WLED, or well, actually from your IP address that you programmed it to.
Well, there's actually in the app, it'll remember the different lights you have. give you the status of them if you're connected to that network, even as long as you're in your home network, whatever, this different subnet, doesn't matter. If you can reach it across your network, you can control it from here.
Gotcha.
So I can turn them on, off, brightness, all that stuff, adjust schedules. You can, everything I've been doing on this web interface, you can do just like open up Chrome, Safari, whatever you have on your phone. You can do this through the web interface or through the app. It's the same difference. And it just looks like this. It's just one long column with some buttons at the bottom instead. The PC mode button just gives you everything tiled across, which makes it easier. It's
Alrighty.
incredibly powerful, and it gets updated all the time. That's the other thing too. This thing is, since I started playing with this 3 months ago, it's been updated like 5 times, which is incredible. The release schedule that they keep putting out for these.
Well, let's wrap this one up so that my wife doesn't punch me in the head. She's texted me about 10 times for dinner. So we'll
Right.
we'll go ahead and move on down to the Polymaker Discord in the what the heck is that called? I have you on full screen. Let me pop out here. There we go. Change to my camera. All right. For everybody watching on YouTube, you can watch these live on the Polymaker Discord. And obviously, if you're watching it on YouTube, I do record these, and you can watch, pause, replay, etc. To figure out if you missed a step. Go back, rewind it, pause it, etc. Look at his cool wiring schematics that he wrote up just for this. If you have any questions, just hit us up in the Polymaker Discord in the Custom Lightbox channel, or in the Multicolor Facebook page, or in the Multicolor Shurdle3D Discord group, and we'll be answering any of your questions that you have. If we cannot figure out the answer, I'm sure we have people that can figure out that answer. So if you have any questions,
I have a bad
just let
habit.
us know.
I have a bad habit of having to find the answers for things. I'll get stuck on that and I'll dig into it.
Yep. And he will leave you a very detailed message on how to fix whatever you're having an issue with. So we'll go into the application hangout for any questions that you need answered. And then thanks everyone for watching. And thanks John for all of the help with the custom lightbox shenanigans. And
Yep.
for everybody else, we'll see you next week. Thanks. So brief interruption. If you could go to shurdle.com/links and purchase any of your items such as Bambu Lab printers, filament, LED string lights you might use for the light boxes, Polymaker Filament, my affiliate link here, Vectorizer AI. It is no longer free. You can use this to use my affiliate link. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.